is a world beyond the borders of human conceit. For most, this world is hidden, cloaked by ignorance. All the while, this astonishing world weighs heavy on their existence. Yet there are those chosen, born into this domain by an unspeakable act of love, rescued from darkness and carried into a marvelous light. Who is this liberator? Who is this savior? You know his identity. But that is only the beginning.
Good morning. My name is Austin, and I'm the lead pastor here. I get the privilege of teaching the scriptures and leading the vision of this church. And so if you're a guest, I'd love to be able to meet you afterwards. If you don't mind stopping by, I'll be over here on the right. And I'd love to just kind of be able to put a name to your face and a face to your name and kind of walk with you through there. Also, just right out of the gate, want to make two quick little deals. First of all, the staging is not ours. North Gaston High School is going to be putting on a production of Grease. And so if you men are looking to take your wife on a hot date and not spend a lot of money, I believe it's May 10, 11, and 12. I saw some posters around the building. You can call the school and find out about that. And bring your wife, your wife on a hot date and come show her Grease. And I can't, Grease is like the scariest thing in the world for me to watch. It's like a horror film. But apparently women love it, so you could score points. So that's a good thing. Also, just real quick, we along with, and I'm gonna probably miss some people, Parkwood Baptist Church, Flint Groves, Forest Point, Core Church, First Presbyterian, First ARP, that is, Bethlehem, First Things First, a handful of churches and nonprofit and one big nonprofit organization. We've all come together to sponsor a marriage conference May 18th. All the proceeds from that conference are going to go to a ministry called Samaritan's Feet. They buy shoes for people that don't have shoes, mostly over in third world countries, but they also do it here locally. It's just a really cool deal that this many churches would be coming together to work on something and pull this off. This is going to go massively public over the next week. Dr. Gary Chapman, who is our speaker, it's a one-night seminar, but he wrote probably one of the most popular books ever written on marriage. So we're expecting these tickets to go very fast. So I want to encourage you, get some for yourself, get a handful for a few other friends. They're $5 a piece, so you can bring two couples for $20, all right? Real easy. So pick some of those up as you go out. Here's what they look like. They're all cool and everything, but you want to get those soon. You can buy them on our website as well. So that's my commercial. Now, here's what we're going to be doing over the next handful of weeks, all right? This week and next week, we're going to specifically be looking at the teachings of Jesus Christ, the God-man. Jesus, God who became flesh and dwelt among us, the God-man. We're going to be looking at his teachings on marriage and divorce. All right, we're going to be looking at him in the context of this spiritual religious conflict that Jesus created. All right, him siding with spirituality, that relationship with God. We're going to be looking at marriage through those teachings, and these teachings blossomed out of this fight that he was constantly having with the religious leaders. After this first 2 weeks of marriage and divorce, we're going to begin talking about accountability, which is a huge part of marriage, and I want to invite you back to that, and you'll see those direct applications into the daily life of marriage as well. So what we're going to do to begin this, we're going to just read the teachings of Jesus on the subject. Jesus directly addresses marriage and divorce in five different passages in the Gospels. 2 of them mirror one another, and the other 3 are kind of independent. I want to just point you to them real quickly, all right? And we're just going to read right through these, and then we're going to dive in to our first level of stuff today, and then we're going to come back next Sunday and dive into it a little bit deeper, all right? So I'm just going to walk through these. What did Jesus teach about marriage, divorce, consequently remarriage? Matthew chapter 5, verse 31. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. That was Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 19. Now, some of these are going to seem quite conflicting, all right? We're going to get into that later. Matthew chapter 19, verse 1. Now, when Jesus had finished these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking him, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore, a man shall leave his wife. That'd be pretty messed up. That's where a man shall leave his father and his mother. I'll just make sure you're listening. And hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer 2, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. And they said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? And he said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, is it better to not marry? Verse 11, but he said to them, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs, that's people who choose to never be married, to be single forever. There are eunuchs who have been so from birth. There are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men. And there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who is able to receive this receive it. Mark records these events this way. Same event, just Mark records it with some different aspects and details. Mark chapter 10, verse 1. And he left there and went to the region of Judea and beyond the Jordan. And the crowds gathered to him again. And again, as was custom, he taught them. And the Pharisees came up in order to test him, asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And he answered, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses allowed a man to write a certificate of divorce and to send her away. And Jesus said to them, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they're no longer 2, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. And in the house, the disciples asked him again about this matter. And they said, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Luke 16:18. Again, this appears to be in contrast and conflict with each other. Come back next week and we're really going to dive into that a lot deeper. Luke 16:18. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. And he who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. Now, if you've read this, your head's spinning. You're going, wait a minute. It's divorcery, not divorcery, divorce, adultery, no adultery. And if you do, if you don't, then there's other passages that don't mention it. It just says it is. And what in the world is Jesus talking about here? Well, it's important, first of all, to understand this. The context of these conversations are a religious debate, all right? You have religious leaders who were coming to Jesus to debate the law. Jesus is having a law discussion, all right? He is playing to their, not playing, he is transferring his conversation into their operating system to talk about marriage from their perspective, from a legal standpoint. In other words, he is entering their debate to resolve their debate from within it, okay? So it's important that we understand that, or you're going to take this thing all wrong, all right? So that's slice number one. Slice number two that we need to understand here, and this is where we're going to really camp out today. Jesus addresses all of these questions about divorce and remarriage by first addressing what marriage is. Everybody say is. All right, what it is, what it for me is, all right? When we say what marriage is, now there are methods that implies that can help your marriage, but what's first and most important is to understand what it is. Now, is a good word. Is a word of reality. Is something that describes the reality of something, and that if it's changed, it's not what it is anymore, all right? So just to kind of help you get into the feel of where we're going, a lot of times when I talk about marriage, I talk about marriage as a biscuit. And if you take something out of it, you don't have a biscuit anymore. Well, the other week I suddenly realized, we have a lot of people from different places in the country and from up north, and they don't really make biscuits up there. They have different things. They don't really know cornbread and biscuits up north like we know cornbread and biscuits down here. And so they were kind of not really understanding. And then some of you, you're more the modern, contemporary Southern person, and you don't really understand what a biscuit is either. And you just think the thing that you buy at the grocery store that's frozen that you put in the oven's a biscuit. That's just a cheap imitation of a biscuit. And so what I decided to do is our media intern, Stephen Smith, he's from Boston. He didn't really know what a biscuit is either, and he's been really anxious to make a video and put his skills to work. So I decided, okay, Stephen, I want you to make my first ever cooking show so we can help Venture understand a little bit about what a biscuit is and what a biscuit's not. So I want to introduce you to my first cooking show. Why don't you guys go ahead and strike it up?
Hi, I'm Austin Ramble. That is Chef Austin to you. And I'm excited today to invite you into my home where I often am found experimenting cooking. Today I'm going to be experimenting with my grandmother's mother's hundreds of year old biscuit recipe. And I want to see if in fact we can put some different things into it, maybe change it around somewhat, and come up with as good or better biscuit. The first ingredient of any, biscuit is obviously going to be flour for the most part. Nice, just plain old all-purpose flour. But I hear that one time during the men's ministry breakfast that happened years ago, they decided to replace the flour in their gravy with some wonderful powdered sugar. So instead of your standard plain flour, we're going to try to sweeten these biscuits up and try something different and new and edgy and contemporary. Sugar. Okay, so we now have our finished product, and obviously cannot roll this out, as you can see. But I'm insistent on trying to bake it. So we're going to pour it into this muffin sheet. That's going to be our experiment. We're going to try to make biscuit muffins. We've got our sugar biscuits cooking, and for our second trial, we're going to see, is it really necessary to use buttermilk? And instead of buttermilk, we're just going to use water. I mean, I'm trying to be health conscious. And that buttermilk with all that fat in it, that can't be healthy. Right away, I'm going to tell you there's a problem with this. This is going to be impossible to roll out for the most part. Pop this in the magic oven for trial number 2. Okay, now we're down to our third and final experiment. And included in the ingredients are baking powder, as we said, Rumford, and baking soda, along with a secret ingredient that we haven't shared with you. And so what we're going to try is those three ingredients kind of work together. And so I'm just wanting to see what's going to happen if we just leave that out. I mean, who says a biscuit has to have baking powder, right? Anyway, we're going to just go ahead and put in our no baking soda baking powder biscuits right behind them. And we'll be right back. We're going to just introduce Southern Biscuits to our northern friend here. And we're doing it with our experimental concepts of, do you really need the ingredients that my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother said you had to have? So our first one, Mr. Bostonian, was where we said, you know what, confectionate sugar looks just like flour. So this is what it produced. It produced a, kind of like a post-dinner looking drink. And so we're going to try that out. And wow. It's definitely sweet. It's it's sweet. And apparently the sugar and the lard have come together and made a very sweet and pasty thing. So next we tried with water. So we got our biscuits here, and I've already prepared my, we always call it sopping down here. So you take your biscuit, they're a little yellowy, they're kind of, this is no buttermilk, this is water. And so the dough, the texture is very different. So I'm just going to go ahead and sop it up. And it's really kind of crumbly. It's not very fluffy. They're not bad. But it's not a bit, it really tastes like a scone. It's not a biscuit. It tastes like a scone. Like it needs blueberries and it needs to be at a Starbucks or something. You know? Yeah. Definitely not a biscuit. Next, we're going to try no baking powder, baking soda. Now, you notice this is very flat. They didn't rise at all. They kind of have the shape of a large pancake. So we're going to try that. I'm going to try it without my sopping in the butter and honey. And it tastes like something you should eat at a Passover meal. Unleavened bread. Edible. It's edible, but it's not good. It's real hard crust. In the middle, it's kind of chewy and pasty tasting again. Now, this is the biscuit. Now, I'm not my grandmother, and I've never been able to produce them like my grandmother, but notice these things are nice and fluffy. The color is appropriate. It's not this yellow, weird color. And when you open them up, oh, look at the steam coming out of that biscuit. But, now that is a biscuit.
Was if you take any ingredient that my great-great-great-great-grandma or whoever was that started that biscuit recipe, if you take any ingredient out of it, it ceases to be a biscuit. Apparently, when you take the flour out, it really ceases to be a biscuit. I found out it was a couple years back in men's ministry, used to do some breakfasts here and there on Sunday morning, and they were busy making the gravy, and they grabbed this Tupperware thing that looked like flour, and it felt like flour. It just wasn't flour, it was confectionate sugar. I think it was Scott Pacer, they start trying to make their gravy out of this confectionate sugar, and then they tried to blame the lady who was over our kitchen work at the time that she didn't label it. Of course, she then picked up the Tupperware and showed them in all capital, large black letters where it said sugar, so it didn't work either. So whenever you change the ingredient of something, all right, whenever you change the ingredient of something, you change what that something is, all right? It becomes something very different. What Jesus does in these passages is he gives us a definition of marriage, that this is what marriage is, that marriage contains these 5 ingredients, and without these 5 ingredients, it's not marriage. It's something other than marriage. It's a marriage substitute. It's a marriage synthetic. And it can either be, something that is edible and maybe not as good, all right, not as great, not as grand, not as awesome, not what God intended it to be, but edible, or something's that's just a total disaster, like that biscuit in a glass. That was nasty. I don't know if you've ever drank lard, buttermilk, sugar, and baking soda mixed together, but it's as gross as you can imagine, all right? So what are those ingredients? What did Jesus teach us in these passages that are the necessary ingredients for marriage to exist, that God designed, all right? Well, the first one that he gives actually the most conversation to in his explanation is that marriage is a unique union between one man and one woman. Now, we've seen all kinds of variations of that through time. We even see them in the Bible, where Solomon, who is the wisest man in the world, had probably more wives than anybody. And so, you know, you can look at that from one or two angles. He was wise, and how did he balance all the women? Or he was a total idiot for having that many wives. I'm not really sure which way you want to define it. It probably both is sufficient. But nonetheless, we see that the biblical concept, the biblical definition from the very beginning is one man, one woman. That's how God designed it. As a matter of fact, God designed it into the universe before there was even a Bible, all right? Now, so Jesus explains it. Jesus says it this way in Matthew chapter 19, verse 4 through 5. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, all right, from the very beginning of creation, and said, therefore a man shall leave his wife and his mother and hold fast to his wife. And Mark records it this way, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife. Now, I want to just pause there for a moment and say this. In the last 100 years, we have learned what happens when you start messing with God's creative order. For quite some time, there was a practice started where people would go in and they would literally strip a mountain of every piece of vegetation on that mountain. They'd cut every tree down on that mountain, and then they wouldn't go back and replace it with anything. They would just cut them all down and then just walk away. I said, well, hey, it's the world, it's our world. God gave it to us to oversee and to order, and so we have the right to do that. So they'd cut every tree down on the mountain and just walk away as if it wasn't going to cause any problem. But see, what they didn't understand was the unintended consequence of that. Because when you cut the trees down, the roots that went into that ground, that held that soil into that ground, eventually rot. And the rains come, and it washes the soil off the mountain. Once the soil is gone, no vegetation ever comes back. The thing that keeps the animal life alive on that mountain goes away. And so the animals either die or go find somewhere else to live. The soil then washes into the creeks and the rivers. And as it goes into the creeks and the rivers, it begins to kill those areas where fish breed and produce more fish. And all of a sudden, the fish populations begin to drop. And a lot of those fish are feeder fish into larger areas. And so all of a sudden, those fish populations begin to drop because their food source of the food that comes off of that creek never gets down there. And so suddenly, people started going, ooh, we need to pay attention to these things. When we go into the created order and we start messing with stuff, it affects things. You see, God has designed the universe to operate on a very small margin of error. As a matter of fact, if you take the world, if you take the earth and you migrate it just a hair closer to the sun, we all die. Just a smidgen closer and all life on earth ends. The same thing is true if you take the earth and you move it just a little teeny bit further away from the sun. Immediately, almost immediately, all life on earth would end that way too. God has created the universe as a system that all works together. It all functions together. And when someone or something violates that system, it has an atomic nuclear effect. It spreads out consequences that breed more consequences that breed more consequences. You and I, thousands of years later, after Adam and Eve, who would have thought that it would be that big of a deal if Eve just ate whatever fruit in the garden she wanted, and if Adam didn't assume his role as leader in the home and say to his wife, that's not a good idea, and instead did exactly what she told him to do in eating that fruit. And so they both sin, they both fail, Adam being the head of that home, representing all mankind, and here we are thousands of years later dealing with the human depravity that was a product, a domino effect of one person saying, I don't have to follow God's system and God's order of the universe. So here we are thousands of years later still having this conversation. Marriage, God designed marriage. He created it. And He created it as not just a relationship between a man and a woman, but a very unique relationship between a man and a woman. It's the order of the universe. And the moment that we violate that, the unintended consequences are historical. There has never, as I said to the county commissioners Thursday night, there has never been a society that has thrived that messed with marriage. The moment marriage fails, that society fails. Marriage, by design, is one woman, one man for life in a unique way. How unique? Well, those are the other four ingredients I want to get into. The second ingredient in marriage, the first ingredient in this biscuit called marriage, is man and a woman. And it's very unique, and it's very explicit, and it's very real. The second one is found in Mark chapter 10, verse 7. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. Now, I've written out a fairly long definition of this because apparently 2,000 years later, we still don't get it. Now, I'm not going to come down hard on our culture because Jesus apparently needed to bring this up 2,000 years ago. And the writers of the Old Testament, as Moses wrote this in the very beginning in Genesis, all right, it was needed thousands of years prior to that. So apparently the human trend is not to leave, all right? What does it mean when he says leave his father and mother? Well, the word translated leave means to leave behind or forsake. I want everybody just to say leave together. On three. 1, 2, 3. Leave, all right? It means to leave behind or forsake. It does not imply excluding parents, all right? It doesn't mean you exclude them. That's called stupidity, all right? The moment that we don't listen to those who have gone ahead of us, the moment that we don't value the wisdom of those who've been there and done that, we tattoo idiot on our head, all right? The definition of a fool is one who does not take wisdom. And wisdom is learned through years. Now, we don't operate as a robot on what they tell us, but you're a fool if you don't consider those who have gone ahead. So I'm not saying to shun and to shove them away. That's not what it's implying here. The concept of forsaking and leaving means this. It doesn't imply excluding parents, but it strongly implies that the marriage relationship is not to be overseen or interfered with. Let me say that again. It is not to be overseen or interfered with by parents. It is the husband's responsibility, by the way, to lead this. It's not only his job, but Jesus does point out that it's the husband's job to set this standard. Now, we live in a day and age economically that has brought a lot of people back to where they're forced into having, mom and dad have to move in with them because they're retired, can't take care of themselves, or they have to move back in with mom and dad because they've lost their job, and so we see multi-generations again living under one roof, and hopefully that's a temporary setup for you, all right, because that makes it real difficult to leave when it's like right here, okay? Nobody say amen if you're in that situation. So I'm not really driving at that, all right? What I'm driving at is those of you who still go to mama to get the bottle. You're still going to daddy to be spoon-fed. All right, the reason why mom and dad is all up in the middle of some of your marriages is because you're dragging them into it. You see, if you keep going to your mom or your dad to complain about your spouse, your mom and your dad are always going to be your mom and your dad. And the more you feed negatively to your parents about your spouse, the more that you're flaming up them being your mom and dad. They're not going to defend your spouse. They're going to, by nature, defend you. And so as you keep feeding that, you are just inviting mom and dad to interfere and be up in your marriage. You're inviting them to define your spouse through the bias of your complaint and negativity. So you need to kill that, all right? You've got to break that deal or it's going to ruin your marriage. Now, consequently, if you are a parent and you keep getting up in the middle of your kid's marriage, you're asking to cause a divorce. You're begging for it. And if you think that's smart, you're crazy. So what you need to do is to let go. Let your child grow up. And part of what growing up means is we let them fail. And so what? Your son may not be doing the right things in his marriage. It doesn't mean you don't give him godly counsel. But it does mean he's got to figure out some things, and it means he's got to fail. Your daughter has got to fail. And you know what? Just because you are older and you have been there doesn't mean you're right. It doesn't mean that as they go through this that they're not going to discover some things that you didn't discover. So this leaving requires all the entities in the family to come to an agreement. Now, for Carrie and I, when we got married, it couldn't have been more perfectly difficult, all right? See, it's easy to keep running to mom and dad. But when we got married, we were exactly 12 hours from my mom and dad and exactly 12 hours for her mom and dad. It was a 12-hour drive to where they lived in southwest Mississippi and a 12-hour drive to where my mom and dad lived in southeast Virginia. And so we were sufficiently far away that when both of us got to that place that we wanted everything to be over and the other person was a total idiot, we didn't have anywhere to go except the couch. And I don't like sleeping on the couch. I'm far too stubborn to do that, all right? So we had to work it out. It was a really good thing. So for some of you, you need to move 12 hours away, all right? You just need to end that deal. It's got to come to an end. Some of you men need to sit down with your mom and your dad and remind them that you gave up the bottle a long time ago and that they need to stop. Some of you might need to go to the in-laws and have that conversation. In a loving, respectful way, tell them it must stop. Effective today. You cannot have a marriage with your parents. It is impossible. By definition, marriage is two people creating a brand new family that leads itself. Invites the wisdom and the relationship and the love and all that. That's great. That's awesome. But not the leadership and not the interference. Are you with me so far? All right, don't be poking one another through this message, okay? Now, Third ingredient. The third one is found again in Mark 10:7. It says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. Cling to his wife, some translations read. What does that phrase mean? Well, again, I kind of wrote out a lengthy definition here because I want you to get the point. Hold fast implies that the relationship must have a uniquely special and significantly higher priority than any other relationship in our life. All right? A uniquely special and significantly higher priority than any other relationship in our life. That's what that means. Now, for some of you, I felt like some of you were going to need this totally idiot-proofed for you. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this idiot-proof. All right? What do we mean when we say that marriage, by definition, one man, one woman, who leave their parents to form a new deal where they hold fast to one another in a way that is uniquely special and significantly higher priority than any other relationship? What do we mean by that? Well, first, what we mean by that is this. First, marriage officially ends with my puberty voice there, all right? Any close personal friendship with somebody of the opposite sex ends it. It's over. Now, for you, I meet with people in premarital counseling and they go, well, you know, he's like a brother to me. He's like a sister to me. A, he's not your brother. B, he's not your sister. And C, it's over, or you don't have a marriage. Again, this is reality. This is what is. It's over. Now, I had growing up, one of my closest friends, my first elementary school sweetheart, all right, was one of my closest friends. For 18 years, there was hardly a day that went by that we didn't communicate in some fashion, shape, or form. All right? That's a pretty close friend, wouldn't you say? When I did her wedding to her husband, I was a part of that ceremony leading that. That was before I got married. When that happened, that relationship was over. That's it. It's finished. See, some of you are playing with fire, and you don't even have a fire suit on. This is somebody that I talked to for 18 years. All right? At most, I might email her once a year and say, how are your kids? I've seen her twice in our entire marriage. Both times I took my wife with me. One time I took my wife, my son, my mom, and my dad when we stopped by to visit her husband and their kids to see how they were doing. This was somebody that I had spent 18 years with every single day. Over. So if you think you're going to come to me and justify a relationship, you are out of your head. All right? Marriage cannot function with a husband and a wife and the person you call your brother. Can't work. That's not marriage. That's something other than marriage. That's putting poop in your biscuit. All right? Not going to work. So those relationships with the opposite sex, they don't go away, but they dramatically change, all right? We have women on our staff that are my friend, but it is a dramatically different relationship that I have with the ladies on our staff than what I have with anybody else in the world, all right? It's very different, all right? So both in its time, its quality, everything, which leads me to this. The relationship that I have with people of the same sex changes radically. See, some of y'all have continued to try to be, all your boys, to spend all that time with your boys again. All you ladies, all your girlfriends, that you hung out with all the time and did all that thing that girls do that we don't understand, and what's kind of difference between men and women? Like women, they'd have the slumber parties and all the girls would get into bed together and hang out. And if men did that, that would not be cool. You know what I'm saying? That would just not be cool. So the women have their women relationships, men have their men relationships, all right? Those are necessary. Those are vitally important. The body of Christ is made up of men and women, and we need one another. Men, you need godly men in your life. Women, you need godly women in your life. Not at a distance, but close. Men, we need brothers in the faith. Women, you need sisters in the faith. Read Titus 2 and the role of that. It is so vital in the body of Christ that we build those relationships. But those relationships are to be dramatically different in their quality and their quantity than with your spouse. The point I wanted to make is this. Marriage officially changes the priority of your relationship with close friends of the same sex. It dramatically changes those relationships with the opposite sex, and then it changes the relationship that we have with the same sex as well. They're a necessity to have, but their priority both qualitatively and quantitatively changes. All right, by quality meaning this idiotic phrase that I used to hear all the time. All right, we know what also, and there's just things that you can say to a brother in Christ that you can't say to your wife. Do y'all catch how awful that is? Like if you can't say it to your wife, that's the problem. That's the problem. It became a big part of a men's movement in America, that we need these relationships because we can't talk to our wife. Hello? That's the problem, not the answer. The relationship that I have with guys in my life is to hold me accountable to have those conversations with my wife. Wisely. I remember the time I told men that I confessed my struggle with pornography to my wife, but I realized it was unfortunately later that I realized some of your wives are not in the same place spiritually my wife is and understands grace and forgave me and worked with me and helped me grow past those struggles. And so men went home and confessed their pornography addiction or whatever to their wife, and then they got kicked out. And so there is some wisdom of when and where and how. But ultimately, you have to, if you can't share something with your spouse, that's the problem, all right? So when we're talking about these relationships, you and I need these relationships with one another, not to substitute the quality, all right? There are to be quality relationships, but they're not to substitute the quality that you have with your spouse. Now, some people are going, yeah, also, what's cool is that, here's the deal, man. I love hanging with the boys, and me and my wife, we have quality time. We have quality time. It's not really, it's not a lot of quantity, but man, it's quality also. And isn't quality better than quantity? Okay. Tomorrow morning when you get up to feed your kids breakfast, better than quantity. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to dig through the Honey Nut Cheerios box, and I want you to pull out the best looking Honey Nut Cheerio in there. I want you to set it on a plate. I want you to get it to the perfect temperature that it can be eaten. And I want you to, tonight before you go to bed, I want you to check the temperature on your refrigerator. And I want you to go by the grocery store and buy some whole organic milk that's as fresh as possible, all right? And don't get none of that water that's got, colored into milk. Get the real milk, all right? The stuff with fat in it, all right? And put it in the refrigerator and get it to the perfect temperature. Google to find out what that is, okay? And then tomorrow morning, I want you to get up and right when your child sits down, I want you to time it perfect where you take the appropriate amount of milk to put on one Cheerio, all right, so that the Cheerio doesn't get too soft, all right, that it's the right temperature, and then you put it on that one little Cheerio, Honey Nut Cheerio, and you put it on there in the right place so that it doesn't get too soft, that it has a perfect texture, that the milk has been there just the perfect amount of time so you get the right amount of crunch, but the good flavor mix between the creaminess of the milk and the crunchiness of the Cheerio. You're getting hungry, aren't you? And I want you to serve them one Cheerio with the highest quality Cheerio ever. And I want you to give that to them and then think that that's enough. Is it going to be enough? No. Is it going to be a great Cheerio? Oh yeah, it's going to be great. But it's only one. So this concept that you and I can have these relationships, you know, ladies with all your girlfriends, guys with all your boys hanging out, playing golf, doing, hunting, fishing, doing all this stuff, and then your wife just, or your husband just gets this little smidgen of quantity, that is such a flaw in our thinking. Quality and quantity go together. We have to understand that in the holding fast, you can only hold fast so many things. You can only hold fast so many people, which leads to this third idiot proofing of this concept. Marriage officially changes the priority of your relationship to career and hobbies. It's okay to be passionate about them, but there must be an obvious gap between them. Remember, we're talking about what marriage is. If we're not holding fast to our spouse, then we're not in the relationship called marriage. Holding fast to career, listen, there's tension in that, isn't there? Like, because job requires time. You can't work 1 hour a week. They fire you, you know? Like, you have to go to work. You have to put effort into that. You have to put passion into it. You have to put commitment into it. Or if it's your own business, it fails. If it's somebody else's business, they fire you because they don't want it to fail. So we're in this tension because we have to work, we have to do this, we have to pour ourselves into it, but we need our quality and the quantity of our time and our focus to be on our marriage, or it's not marriage. How do we do that? Well, we're going to talk more about that in the coming weeks as we deal with different subjects. But I just want to say that what marriage is something that holds even the relationship with our spouse in a higher qualitative and quantitative measure, priority, and experience than our hobbies, our careers, any of that. Some of you married a cotton-picking golf club or a shotgun or a ball or a thread needle or shopping or whatever it is. You married where you get that paycheck from. You married the bank account. And buddy, that's a lonely place to be married because it gives nothing back. All you get's taxes. Next ingredient. Fourth, there's one man, one woman who leave family, develop their own, who hold fast to one another. All right? Then that segues into this. Mark 10:8, it says, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. And some are going, what? That sounds awfully sexual. Well, because it is, all right? Which is the fourth ingredient. Becoming one flesh directly implies sex. Some men are about to go, glory! I am glad I came to church, all right? I'd never been to church in my life, but you just learned all the church language. You just said, amen, hallelujah, glory. I mean, you were spouting off words you didn't even know what to mean. You developed speaking in tongues right there in your seat, right? Becoming one flesh directly implies sex. Now, sex is to be a consistent and celebrated part of your marriage. Simple as that. That is biblical from beginning to end. I'm going to stop there for a second and say this. Some of you men are going, I can't wait to get home now. The Bible says it. But can I encourage you, the reason why you might not be experiencing sexual intimacy in your marriage may be because of the way you're treating your wife, okay? It may be because of the experience that you're inviting her into is all about you and not her. And so none of those things make sex appealing for her. So before you go laying out the Bible and getting all legalistic in your marriage, start kind of thinking about why she always has a headache and a stomach ache. Now, part of that, I think, is just female. Hey, honey, oh, my stomach hurts, my head hurts. Here's aspirin and Tums. All right, now what? You know? So I think part of that is male versus female. Men are wired to sex. Their sex drive peaks about every 3 days. For a woman, it's every 30 to 40 days. There's a problem, right? But nonetheless, despite the biology, no matter where the biology takes us, God designed sex to be a part of your marriage, to be something that you celebrate together, that you enjoy together, that you explore together. I did a whole series on it. I know we got mixed ages in here, so I don't want to get much further into that. But I just say this, if you go to my podcast, if you go to our website, dareadventure.org, click media, I did a whole series on what the Bible teaches about sexuality and marriage. It's out of a book called Song of Solomon. Some 14-year-old boy just said, I'm now I'm going to read my Bible, all right? Song of Solomon is about love, passion, and sex, and it's really hard to miss when you read it, all right? So I did a whole series on that. It's a couple years ago. You can go on our podcast and get all the way back down in there, and you can read about those things. But here's what I want to hit you with, all right? The sexuality inside of your marriage that it's supposed to be, something enjoyed. I'm really walking a fine line here because we have people that I got to be careful as they hear this. I'm positioning myself so I'm walking a tightrope. I don't know why, but that's the way I feel. All right, so sex is designed to be between a man and a woman. It's designed to be between a man and a woman who are married, but it's also designed to be between two people, not one. Okay? So, you just, that. What it does is it orchestrates between a man and a woman. The sexuality inside a marriage shows the team and the unity that has to occur both physically as well as in cooperation. You see, because when sex is all about yourself, then you're probably not going to get to have a lot of it. But when sex is about the other person, where your focus is to fulfill their desires. When two people are bringing to the table what is unique to them to serve the other person sexually, then it's an experience that a couple tends to want to return to. Now that gives us a picture of not just the sex act, but marriage as a whole. To become one flesh is when two very different people, a man and a woman, are not just biologically different. They're different at every level, all right? And that's something that I think we can all say amen to. For those people, they come to me, when a man comes to me and says, you know, we have so much in common. I go, all right, the reason you're saying that is because you're not married yet. When you get married, you'll find out, once again, that you are totally different, all right? Totally. Men and women think absolutely north and south from one another, all right? It's just the way we're designed. So when a man and a woman bring those things together into marriage, whether it be sexually, whether it be in communication, whether it be in hobbies, whether it be in skill sets, whether it be in the way you design, whatever it is, when a man and a woman bring that together and they begin to serve one another with those differences, then they become one flesh. They become a team. For those football fans, imagine if you created a football team of just quarterbacks, Heisman Trophy quarterbacks. You'd lose every single game, every one of them. If you had a baseball team with nothing but first basemen, you would lose every game. You see, it requires those differences. So in becoming one flesh, both in the differences sexually and what that does for one another, to every other aspect of the marriage, it's the differences that God has created in you. Listen, Carrie and I are polar opposites in so many ways, it's not even funny sometimes. Now, I'm saying that on her behalf, all right? I always think it's funny. And she has to suffer through it, all right? We're so different. But God's design is in that. The body of Christ is very different. There's an eye, an ear, and a nose, and a foot. The Bible talks about the body of Christ as a human body and how everybody is different and made up differently and functions differently. It's a radical thing. So it's important that you and I understand, all right? The reason you're different from your spouse is by design. Because what God desires is for oneness, and oneness requires two complete different individuals, not codependency where we find our identity in somebody else. That's not marriage. Matter of fact, that's a disaster. Marriage is when two totally different human beings come together in one flesh and form one team, one entity, one family, separate and autonomous to itself. That's what marriage is, which leads to the fifth ingredient. Number 5, I gotta hurry up and I'll be done. Number 5, what therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Matthew 19:6. This is the fifth ingredient that Jesus brings to the table over what marriage is. He says this. In teaching us that God has joined it together, he's giving us an illustration of a yoke. How many have ever seen pictures of the old plows where they had 2 mules or something pulling the plow? Anybody? Okay, you remember there was this thing that would join the two mules together? I'm not saying that you and your husband or you and your wife are mules. I'm just saying, all right? What they put together, remember that thing is called a yoke. And what a yoke does is it binds them together so that they're forced to work together, all right? They have to work together. So the farmer would stand back there and he'd pop them, you know, and get them to pull that plow, and he could trust that they would pull the plow in the same direction. If they weren't yoked together, one mule might go that way, the other mule might go that way, and not only get nothing done, but they might even break the plow. So this yoke would pull them together so they could be one as a team. Jesus says something that literally blew me away here when I dove down to it. He did not say, get God in your marriage so you can be yoked. He said, when one man and one woman commit themselves for life in marriage, God necessarily yokes them together, whether they believe in Him or not. You see, remember, marriage predates the Bible. God created marriage in the very beginning of the universe. It was a part of His created order. One man, one woman for life. And so when a man and a woman commit themselves, God binds them together. It is as much as God created a tree and a rock and the sun, God created marriage. Now, what does that mean? Well, God joining the couple implies binding them together in a covenant that's written by Him and is therefore defined by Him. I'm going to break that down one more level. That's this side of the coin. If we look at the top of the coin, it says, our marriage is bound together by God. He's the one that sticks us together. Now, if we flip the coin over and look at the other side of that coin, that fact, that ingredient, this is what we find. This is for your notes. God is the binding agent in marriage. He is the binding agent. God is the binding agent in marriage. Therefore, the level by which God is alive and active in you will be the level by which your marriage bond is realized, experienced. I think the best way I can explain it is this way. I've known all my life that God has created everything. I know that He is creator by nature. But when my son was born, talk about a weird act, all right? You know, as through the pregnancy, I'm looking at my wife's belly and there's this thing moving around in it. You know, and she'd be like, look, 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 and like his butt would pooch out of her belly. And she would think it was cute. I was freaked out. All right? I'm looking at this going, oh, that's cute. She's like, touch it. You know, because in my mind, I'm thinking back to those 80s horror films. You remember that? Where like the alien would bust out of the woman's chest or something, like, you know, all his teeth. And that to me was like, oh gosh, there's an alien and alive in my wife. And some people describe, you know, the birth is so beautiful. No, it is not. It is freaky. Now I kind of get into freaky stuff, all right? I like them old horror flicks, so I'm kind of into it, but at the same time, I'm like, this is some freaky mess, man. This is Freddy Krueger, Friday the 13th craziness, all right? This is some Jason, kill. All right, so this is some weird mess. So, you know, they come in, and they go through the whole deal, you know, they get your wife, they strap your wife in like, you know, all right, here it comes, you know, and then out of your wife, out of your precious, beautiful wife, comes this screaming, bloody, hairy thing. Right? And it comes out of your wife. And you're like, what in the world happened? So I'll never forget, all this is going down. And I'm both mesmerized by it and freaked out by it equally. And there's this war. And it didn't stop me from being like, oh, so the placenta, how does that work? And he's all showing me, you know, parents like, oh, is this girl, you know, freaking out. But, you know, he gives me the scissors to cut the cord, you know. And I cut that cord. And it was just like, all of a sudden, when I cut that cord, I've known all my life, believed all my life that God created the universe. But when I cut that cord, all of a sudden, I had a wow moment about who God is. All of a sudden, Him being creator wowed me. As I took Ari and washed him off and I brought him back, and Carrie got to hold him for the first time, you know, because she carried him around for 9 months and went through labor and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, so she gets to hold him first. You know. But there was this amazing thing as they were kind of taking him and moving him to go get washed and all this, he was crying, and I'll never forget it. It was the weirdest, most awesome thing. It just shows the creative order. I spoke. I do that a lot. I spoke, and immediately my son stopped crying and turned to see where that voice came from. Now, there are nurses and doctors. There's all these people in the room. Everybody's talking. And the moment I said a word, he swung around in a defined way that we all went. So in all those events, I just kept seeing the glory and the majesty of God. Now, in a reverse effect, in marriage, when you begin to get in tune with God, as you begin to grow in your relationship with Him, the reality that God is the binding agent in your marriage suddenly starts to get clear. And you start to see this miracle called marriage. See, some of you have lost your appreciation for it. You're so bitter and so tuned in to what's wrong with your marriage that you've missed the beauty of what marriage is. Marriage is this once in a universe event. There's nothing like it, where God binds together a man and a woman, where by created order, God looked at man and said, it is not good for him to be alone. I'm going to create a wife. It is not good for a wife to be alone. It's not good for a woman to be alone or a man to be alone. I've created marriage to be this beautiful thing. He has designed it. This bond is His. And so as you draw closer into a relationship with Jesus, as you draw into Him and you begin to know God, then suddenly you recognize God in the things that God exists in. As you become increasingly aware of Him, you become increasingly aware of this beautiful thing that God has created, that He has brought together. And this woman that lives in your home is no longer that woman. But suddenly that woman is the miracle that God has placed in your life. That man is not that annoying person who doesn't love me and pay attention to me and serve me. That man is this beautiful thing that God has orchestrated in the universe to bring into your life. You see, that doesn't happen when we look at one another. When we look at one another, we see our faults. But when we get consumed with Him, we begin to recognize the reality of what has happened. You see, as I get closer to Christ, I am truly mesmerized that God has blessed me, not just with a wife, but my wife. And ironically, when my relationship with God suffers, I am a whole lot less appreciative and blown away that I have a relationship with a woman called Carrie. You see, that's what marriage is. It's not a method or a practice. It's a reality. And anything other than that leads to a scone or sludge in a cup. So here's my challenge for you. God is the binding agent in marriage. All right? So, all these different things we looked at. Here's our challenge. If He's a binding agent, called to leave, cleave, all these things are what marriage is. So what we need to do is look at it from that angle. If you are eliminating any one of these ingredients, you're changing your relationship with your spouse to something other than marriage. If you're eliminating any one of these ingredients, you're changing your relationship with your spouse to something other than marriage. What ingredient or ingredients is missing? What needs to change in? Now, everybody, I want to just say the nice all capital letter word together. What is missing and what needs to change in you? Let's say that again. What is missing and what needs to change in you for it to be there? Now, some of you through the entire message have been looking at your wife going, the reason why we don't have a real marriage, the reason why we got a scone instead of a biscuits, because you. And I'm not saying there might not be truth in that. All right? But as we're going to talk about in the coming weeks, 2 weeks from today, we're going to dive into this discussion heavy. Your job is not to change anybody, including your wife. Because you can't. You're not God. And if you think you can change your wife, or wives, if you think you can change your husband, you're playing idolatry. You somehow think you're God. And the moment we start thinking and acting like we're God is the very moment that everything comes to an abrupt end. That's like when I think I'm a plumber. Not good. When I think I can fix a car. Not good, except for the mechanics in the world who get to spend a lot of money repairing what I broke. We're not God. We're to love one another towards Jesus. We're to encourage one another towards Jesus. We're to hold each other accountable. We're going to talk about that tension between accountability and trying to be God. We're going to talk about that in depth over the coming weeks. But today what we need to understand is this. If there's a missing ingredient, if there's a missing of the ingredient of leaving, if there's a missing ingredient of cleaving, holding fast, if there's a missing ingredient of uniqueness, if there's a missing ingredient of one flesh, if there's a missing ingredient of recognizing the blessing and the beauty of what God has given, that He has bonded you together, then you need to own that responsibility. You need to confess that. You need to confess that to your spouse. You need to talk about that with your spouse. And you need to worship God together as you ask Him to change you so that the ingredients of your marriage can become what marriage is, so that you move from a relationship with another human being to what is actually a marriage. Some of you are married legally, but you're not married in reality. You're married in the eyes of God still, but you're still not married in reality. What you have is not marriage. And so my prayer for you is that you will confess what God needs to change in you. And then you'll seek Him to do that.